welcome to the Night Audio Stories channel. And today, I'm bringing you my new original story.
Welcome to the Night Audio Stories channel. This is a horror story called Below the Upper Level. The post had been up for 11 minutes before someone screenshotted it, and 14 minutes before the forum administrator deleted it. By then, it had been seen by 63 registered users, and of those 63, most read it and moved on, or logged off, or wrote it off as a joke account, someone with too much time and a dark sense of humor testing the community's patience. Most of them, but not all. Marcus Webb saw it at minute 9, sitting in Columbus in his apartment, in a worn desk chair with a cup of coffee going cold beside the keyboard, because he still checked the forum every few days, even though he hadn't been underground in 8 months. He checked the forum the way he imagined amputees felt toward the space where a limb had been, not with expectation, but with a habit of attention that the body hadn't learned to redirect yet. He read the post, one sentence: "The upper level is accessible now." He read it twice. He read the username, a string of characters that looked random and probably wasn't. He copied the username into a notes document, and then he sat very still for a while, the kind of still that had nothing to do with physical comfort and everything to do with the mind running very fast in a space that there was not much room to run. Then he took a screenshot. Then he closed the forum tab and opened it again, and the post was gone. He sat with the screenshot for 3 days. He did not call anyone. He did not post on the forum. He did not call the Cincinnati Police Department, where the detective's case was still technically open, and where Marcus's calls, of which there had been 4 in the 8 months since the night he'd come out of the tunnel, had been received with decreasing engagement each time, the last one resulting in a voicemail he was not sure had been listened to. He thought about Lena. He thought about her cord reel, wound, neat and dry. He thought about what it meant that something had wound it, the patience of that, the specific attention to detail, the knowledge that a person would look for the reel, and the reel being wound correctly would communicate something. He thought about what it was trying to communicate, and he thought about this the way he thought about the wiring in unfamiliar installations, tracing from the end result back to the intent, working against the current to find the source. The reel had been wound correctly, and it had been left where he would find it, and it had been left by something that understood tools, that understood the protocol, that had been down there in the warm water below the marks it had made, and it had looked at the cord reel and understood what a cord reel was, and wound it and placed it on the water's surface for Marcus to find. Which meant it had watched him use the cord, which meant it had been watching since before they'd found the door, which meant it had let them in. On the 4th day, Marcus bought a bus ticket to Cincinnati. He bought a bus ticket because the police had his car on file. His car had been photographed in the parking structure on Elm Street on the night of the report, the plate documented, and Marcus did not know whether they would run his plates if he drove back. He did not know that they would, so he simply did not want to find out. He packed light, headlamp, new batteries, 2 spares, gloves, his thinnest wetsuit rolled tight because the water had been warm, but he had no way of knowing how long he would be in it or whether that would change. The cord reel was in the pack already. He had kept it. He had kept Lena's cord reel since the night he'd taken it from the water's surface, and now he re-spooled it with his own cord, 500 feet, marked at 100, 200, 300, 4, 5, with colored bands in the old sequence: orange, red, white, blue, green. He had never used a green band. He had never needed 500 feet. He packed the camera. He had thought about not packing the camera. Then he packed it. He left Columbus on a Thursday morning in July, 8 months and 11 days after he had first gone underground in Cincinnati, and he did not tell anyone where he was going, which was the same mistake he had made the first time, and he was aware it was a mistake, and he made it anyway, because the alternative was telling someone where he was going and what he was going to do, and he did not have a version of that conversation that made any sense to anyone who hadn't been in the room with the warm water and the shape below the surface. Cincinnati in July was a different city than the one he'd been in 8 months before. The Pendleton district had foot traffic, outdoor seating, the specific noise of a neighborhood that was in the process of becoming something, construction on 2 corners, a new restaurant where a laundromat had been, the general optimistic percussion of urban renewal proceeding on schedule. Marcus moved through it in the afternoon heat, wearing a light jacket over his pack straps, and he noted the activity the way he noted any surface condition before going underground, as information about what was directly above the space. More weight, more vibration, more water use. Restaurants meant drains. Drains meant the upper system was running. He had thought about that on the bus. About the post, the upper level is accessible now. About what accessible meant and from which direction. He found a coffee shop 2 blocks from the parking structure and sat in it for 2 hours, drinking water and watching the street through the window and thinking through what he knew and what he didn't. The coffee shop was the kind that had been there for 30 years without deciding to be anything in particular. Mismatched chairs, a counter worn smooth by elbows, a chalkboard menu that had not changed in the years since someone had written it. It had the specific quality of a place that had survived by being genuinely indifferent to whether people liked it, and Marcus found this, in his present state, restful. He sat at a window table and watched Pendleton go about its Thursday evening, and he thought about systems. What he knew, the chamber below, the iron door, the flooded room, the marks, the shape, existed at approximately 40 feet of depth below the Pendleton district. The upper storm system above it was standard 1890s municipal construction. The upper system and the lower chamber were connected by the corridor with the cut stone walls, accessed via the bricked-up opening behind the modified English bond. What he didn't know, what accessible meant, whether Lena had made it accessible by going down, whether the shape had made it accessible by doing something from below, whether the post had been literal, a statement of physical fact, or something else, something that used the word accessible the way a large translation used a small word, approximate rather than exact. He thought about what he knew about water. Water filled the path of least resistance. If the chamber below was filling, if the water was still rising at the rate Lena had calculated, 8 inches every 6 weeks, then at some point the water would reach the level of the bricked opening. At some point, the upper system would carry the warm water under the Pendleton district, under the restaurants and the construction and the foot traffic, and eventually the warm water would reach the surface. That was one version of accessible. He also thought about the other version, the version that wasn't water rising, but something else moving, something that had learned in 8 months of having Lena in the warm water, something new about the space above it, the way a researcher learned from a subject, something that had been observing the surface world from below for a very long time, and which had recently, through proximity to a person who knew the surface world, learned something that revised its understanding of what accessible could mean. He was not sure which version frightened him more. He was not sure frightened was even the right word. He had been doing a kind of inventory in the 8 months since November of what he actually felt about what he had seen below Cincinnati, not what he was supposed to feel, the terror,
the dissociation, the appropriate response to a thing that exceeded the available frameworks. What he actually felt when he was honest with himself in the pre-dawn hours was something closer to recognition. The same recognition he'd felt the first time he'd gone underground in Columbus at 23, when the scale of what was below had revealed itself, and he'd understood that the world had more to it than the world presented. He left the coffee shop at 9 in the evening and walked to the parking structure. The parking structure was the same. This was both obvious and notable. He had been preparing for it to be different, for the access plate to be gone or sealed or guarded, for the city to have responded in some way to what was below it. The city had not responded. The city did not know. The city went about its business in the July heat, and below its business the warm water moved in the dark, and the marks accumulated on every surface, and something old and patient and curious continued what it had always been doing. The utility plate was in the same basement level, same location, half hidden behind a concrete pillar the way it had always been, the city's infrastructure intersecting with itself in the characteristically unself-conscious way of urban systems built in layers over a century by people who kept different sets of records. Marcus had the key. He had kept the key, too, for the same reason he had kept the cord reel, not from sentimentality, not from forgetfulness, but because some part of him knew 8 months ago, standing in the parking structure lot with blood on his chin and a dead company's phone still ringing in his memory, that he would be back. He unlocked the plate. He looked down. The shaft was dark and smelled of mineral water and old stone and the specific chemistry he had learned to recognize as the signature of the deep level, older than drain, older than basement, older than the geological record of the city's infrastructure, a smell that predated the city by an interval he couldn't measure. And underneath it, or through it, or present alongside it in a way that his nose passed as layered, warmth. The smell of warmth, not heat smell, not smoke, not combustion, the smell of a living temperature, the smell of a space that was inhabited.
The upper system was different. Not visibly different. The 1890s brick was the same, the arched ceilings the same, the junction points the same, but the air was different, and the sound was different, and Marcus registered both within the first 30 feet in the way that a person who had spent enough time underground registered changes in a space, not through a specific identified stimulus, but through the body's accumulated experience, the body that had been underground enough times to have an opinion about what underground was supposed to feel like. The air was warm, not dramatically warm, warmer than a storm system in July should have been. The upper system in summer ran cooler than the surface, the earth above it absorbing some of the summer heat before it could penetrate to the infrastructure level. What Marcus was feeling was warmth coming from below, conducted up through the brick and the stone beneath it, diffusing into the system's air over the weeks or months since the level had, in whatever sense the post had meant, become accessible. And the sound. He stopped 20 feet in and listened. The pulse was in the upper system, not as strong as it had been at 260, down the corridor, outside the iron door, attenuated, diffused, the way a bass frequency traveled through walls. You heard the energy more than the note, felt it in the structure rather than the air. But it was there, the same irregular rhythm, the same quality that his brain had kept trying and failing to fit to a known pattern. Not machinery, not water movement, something else, something biological in the way that a heartbeat was biological, carrying the same information a heartbeat carried. There is something here, and it is alive, and it is continuing. Marcus kept moving. He found the bricked opening,
the modified English bond, the telltale newer mortar, and he stopped. He put his hand on the bricks. They were warm. He removed 2 bricks. Beyond them, the corridor. He shone his light in. The corridor was full of water to a depth of approximately 6 inches, not flowing, still, like everything connected to the deep system, was still, but present, standing water at the base of the cut stone walls, warm when Marcus put his gloved hand in, and luminescent in the specific, pale, iridescent way he remembered. The walls themselves were wet uniformly to the height of his shoulder. The luminescence was stronger than he remembered, or stronger than it had been in November. In November it had been barely perceptible. Now it was visible without the headlamp if he killed the beam for 30 seconds to let his eyes adjust. A faint distributed glow from the stone itself, the way certain organisms glowed in the dark, the way the deep ocean glowed with the bodies of things that had been down there long enough to make their own light. He stood at the opening for a long time. He thought, the water reached the corridor. The water came up to 6 inches in the corridor. The chamber below was no longer sealed. It had been sealed by the iron door, and now either the door is open or the water had found another path, and either way the warm water from the deep system was in the upper corridor, and the upper corridor was connected to the upper storm system, and the warm luminescent water was in the storm system now, had been in the storm system, and the city above was using the storm system, and eventually... He put on the wetsuit. He took the cord reel. He attached the cord's end to the iron rung of the access shaft behind him, the same rung he'd used as anchor before, and he stepped through the bricked opening and into the standing water, and began to move.
The 6 inches of standing water made the walk different. Each step displaced a wave that traveled ahead of him and returned, and the returned wave carried information about the space, the width of the corridor, the uniformity of the floor, the distance to the next significant change. He read this the way he read sonar data, not with the precision of an instrument, but with the approximate accuracy of long experience. The space was the same. The space had always been the same. It was everything in the space that had changed. At the red band, 200 feet, the water was at his knees. He stopped. He did the arithmetic. The corridor was 200 feet long, with a 1 degree downward grade. At 1 degree, 200 feet translated to approximately 3 feet of vertical descent. The water in the corridor was at his knees, which was approximately 20 inches of depth. If the floor was 3 feet lower at the far end than at the bricked opening, and the water was 20 inches deep at this point, then the water at the far end was... He stopped doing the arithmetic. The arithmetic didn't matter until he got there and could see what he was dealing with. He moved forward. At 250, past the red band, into the territory where the acoustics had changed on the first visit, where the space's response to presence shifted, he noticed the marks. The marks on the walls, Lena's marks, the ones that had been 3 horizontal bands at chest height on the eastern face of the corridor. He had photographed them on the first visit and had studied the photographs in the months after, had sent them to the 2 archaeologists and gotten useless responses, had sat with them and tried to understand them the way he'd tried to understand any unfamiliar system, from the inside, finding the logic that the system had for itself. The marks had spread. Not the same marks duplicated, new marks or additional marks extending upward from the original 3 bands. He stopped and put his headlamp on the wall and looked. There were now 5 bands, 6. The marks extended from the waterline up to the ceiling, which at this point in the corridor was approximately 8 feet, and the 2 highest bands were above eye level, cut into stone that he couldn't reach without a ladder, cut with the same smoothness, the same zero-curve precision, the same complete absence of evidence of a tool. Something had been here. Something had been here since November, in the corridor, and it had continued what it had started on the eastern wall of the chamber below. It had come up into the corridor and added to the inscription. Marcus stood in knee-high, warm, luminescent water and looked at marks he couldn't read, that something had added to a wall while he had been in Columbus, drinking coffee and going to work and not talking about what he'd seen. He photographed them, every band, every mark. He worked systematically, the way he always worked, the way the training of systems analysis asserted itself, even when the system was one he had no training for. He reached the iron door at a count of 40 steps from the red band, which matched his count from the first visit. The door was open. Not standing open, open in the sense that it had been removed. The hinges were on the wall, the bolts still in the stone, the iron flanges still set, but the door itself was gone. A 1-inch iron door, solid, hand-forged, 160 years old. Gone. He looked at the floor of the corridor beneath the doorframe. No debris, no shards, no rust fragments, no evidence that the door had been broken or forced. Simply absent, the way a thing was absent when it had been deliberately moved with care, with something that understood it as a door and understood the function of removal. He thought about the cord reel, wound neat, wound dry, placed precisely. He thought about something that understood tools, not as objects to be manipulated by force, but as objects with functions, with correct and incorrect uses. He thought about what else something that understood tools might have done in 8 months of access to the iron door. The doorframe was an opening with no door, warm air moving through it from the chamber below, and the luminescence from the chamber was visible as a pale glow at the base of the opening, and the sound of the pulse was present and clear and close, closer than it had been at the red band, closer than it had been anywhere except directly outside the door on the first visit. Here at the removed door, it was not in his chest, it was in his hands. Marcus stood in the doorframe. Below him, the slope, steeper than he remembered, or steeper because now it was submerged, the chamber was flooded. Not to the ceiling, not yet. The water surface was approximately 3 feet below the door frame sill, which meant the chamber had something like 15 feet of air above the waterline, which meant it was not yet full, which meant there was still time, though time for what Marcus did not let himself finish thinking. What he could see of the chamber walls above the waterline was entirely covered in marks, every surface, floor to ceiling on the visible walls, and the portions of the ceiling that his angle of view permitted, every inch of them marked. The original 3 horizontal bands on the eastern face had become one element of an inscription that used every available surface with the density of something that had much to record and limited space in which to record it. The marks were not uniform in size or weight. Some were small, precise, the scale of careful handwriting. Others were larger, bolder, the scale of something meant to be read from across the chamber. Some were at the waterline and partially submerged, visible in the luminescent water as a continuation of the surface inscription going down into the flooded depth, covering the walls below the waterline as well. It had not stopped at the waterline. The inscription continued below the water's surface, into the flooded depth, onto the floor, into the passage at the far end. Everything it could reach it had covered. The water's surface was still. Marcus sat down in the doorframe, feet hanging above the water, and looked.
He had been looking for maybe 3 minutes when he saw Lena. She was at the far end of the chamber, near the submerged passage that led to the deeper system. She was in the water. She was present, was the word his mind offered before the more specific words became available. Present in the water, partially submerged, with the water at her shoulders and her head above the surface, and her face turned toward him, and her expression. He was already on his feet. Lena. His voice went into the chamber and returned wrong, the same acoustic distortion he remembered from the first visit, but worse now, the chamber fuller with water, the space more resonant, his own voice coming back to him as something he would not have recognized as his name for the person if he'd not known he'd said it. She didn't answer. She looked at him. In the luminescent light of the chamber, her face was present. That was still the word, present and looking at him, her eyes open, her mouth closed, her shoulders above the waterline, and the rest of her below. Lena, his voice again the wrong return.
He was doing the calculation before he knew he was doing it. The distance from the doorframe to where she was standing, 40 feet, 50. The depth of water between them, unknown. The slope continued below the doorframe. She might be standing on the slope, or she might be in the deeper section. The temperature, 93 degrees. He had no reason to think it had changed. The luminescence, the marks on every wall, the iron door that had been removed, the post that had appeared on the forum. The upper level is accessible now. He looked at Lena. He looked at the water between them. "Can you come to me?" he said. She looked at him for a long time. Then she moved. She moved through the water toward the slope, toward the doorframe, toward Marcus, and she moved with a fluency that was wrong, in the way that movement in water was supposed to be not fluent, was supposed to carry the resistance that water provided, the drag, the effort. She moved through the chest-deep water the way a person moved through air, without resistance, without displacement, the water's surface around her body showing none of the turbulence that a person moving through water at that depth would generate. She reached the base of the slope. She walked up it. She came to the doorframe, and she was 3 feet below him, and she looked up at him. He had known Lena for 3 years. He had met her in person twice, the night they'd gone in together and the morning after, briefly before they'd separated. He knew her face from the forum profile photo she'd used for 2 years and from the clear images his memory had made of her face in the beam of his headlamp on the night of the first descent. He knew her face well enough to know that the face that was looking at him from 3 feet below was Lena's face in the way that a perfect recording was the original, accurate at every measured frequency, missing something that measurements didn't capture. "Marcus," she said. Her voice came back wrong too, the same wrong return, the same distortion, but it had come back at all, which meant the distortion was in the acoustics of the chamber and not in her voice. He held that. "Are you all right?" he said. "I've been here." 8 months, he said. "Yes." She didn't look like 8 months. She didn't look like 1 month. She looked like the night of the first descent. The same jacket, the same pack, the same headlamp he'd last seen her wearing, dark with disuse, the battery presumably long dead. "I've been here," she said again, and in the way she said it, not as repetition, not as confusion, but as confirmation, as the most accurate available answer. Marcus understood that she was not reporting a duration. She was reporting a location. "I have been in the only place I have been," was what she was saying. Here was the whole of it. "The cord reel, you wound it." A pause in which something happened behind her eyes that wasn't quite the calculation a person made before they answered a question, but wasn't quite anything else he had a name for. not the blank pause of someone who hadn't understood the question, not the searching pause of someone who had understood it and was looking for the answer. Something in between, in the space that didn't have a name because it didn't belong to the kind of exchange that happens between two people above ground in ordinary light. I didn't wind it, it was wound. He looked at her for a long time.
She looked at him. Her gaze was direct, unhurried, and the thing about it that he noticed and filed away was that it was not searching. She was not looking at him the way a person looked when they had been a long time without familiar faces and were reassembling, recalibrating. She was looking at him the way a person looked when they had been given a great deal of time to think about a specific person and had formed a complete and considered understanding of that person and were now verifying it against the original. "Did it hurt you?" he said. She thought about this. "No," she said, "it doesn't hurt." A pause. "It doesn't do anything that hurts. It observes. It's very still, and it observes, and it's warm, and the light is—" She paused again. "You saw the light in the water?" "Yes." "It's not light from a source," she said. "It's not generated. It's the same as the marks. It's residue. The marks hold the light the way paper holds ink. What it does leaves a trace." She looked at the chamber wall, the luminescent marks barely visible in the corridor's darkness. "I've been in the light for 8 months. I think some of it stayed." He looked at her. In the headlamp's beam, she looked ordinary in every physical particular, but in the moments when the beam shifted or she moved slightly out of its direct range, there was something, faint, barely perceptible, something he was not certain he wasn't constructing from his own expectation, something in the quality of the dark immediately around her, the way the luminescence in the walls seemed slightly more present in her vicinity, as if what had been observing her for 8 months had left a residue. "Are you—" He stopped. He'd been going to say, "Are you all right?" again, but the answer had been, "I've been here," which was not the same thing. "Can you come with me? Back up?" "I came up," she said. "I'm up." "Out," he said, "to the surface." The pause again, longer this time. He watched her face during the pause and tried to read it the way he read any unfamiliar thing, from the inside, finding the logic it had for itself. What he saw was not distress. What he saw was not injury or trauma in the ways that he understood trauma, the dissociation, the hypervigilance, the physical markers of a body under prolonged stress. What he saw was something he did not have a word for, that occupied the space where a person was and was not quite that thing and not quite anything else. Something that had been still for a long time and was now considering motion, the way deep water considered motion when disturbed from above. Not resistance, not refusal, but the slowness of something for which the surface world had become over 8 months of stillness, a concept that required deliberate reapproach. "I don't know," she said. He brought her out of the chamber and up the corridor and through the bricked opening and into the upper storm system. She moved with the same wrong fluency through the knee-high standing water, no displacement, no effort, and she moved through the upper system's air with a lightness that Marcus watched and tried not to watch, the way you tried not to watch something that made the available explanations feel inadequate. At the base of the shaft, she looked up at the iron rungs and looked at Marcus. "Go first," he said. She went up. Marcus followed, pulling the cord behind him. He wound it as he went, the 100-foot bands coming back onto the reel, orange, red, white, blue. He didn't need the green band. He hadn't needed 500 feet. She was waiting for him at the top,
standing in the parking structure's basement level in the fluorescent light, and in the fluorescent light she looked different from how she'd looked in the headlamp's beam and in the chamber's luminescence, more present in one way, more clearly herself. But the fluorescent light was not kind to whatever had changed, which was something in the quality of her stillness, something in the way she occupied the space around her, which was the stillness of the chamber's water rather than the ordinary unconscious motion of a person standing still. He called 911 from the parking structure. He said he'd found someone who had been reported missing 8 months prior, that she appeared physically unharmed, that she needed medical evaluation. He gave the address. He sat with Lena on the parking structure's concrete floor while they waited for the ambulance. She sat cross-legged with her hands in her lap, and she looked at the fluorescent light overhead with an expression of what he could only call attention, as if the fluorescent light were interesting, as if ordinary light, the light of surfaces, the electrical light of above-ground spaces, was something she was relearning. "The marks," he said, "on the walls, in the corridor and the chamber, are they—" He stopped. "Do you know what they say?" She was quiet for a while. Then, "Not in words." "What do you mean?" "I know what they're for, not what they say. That's not how it works." She looked at the light. "It's not language. It's more like record-keeping, documentation." She paused. "It documents what it finds here, what it observes. It does the same thing." Marcus thought about the marks covering every surface of the chamber, about the new bands added to the corridor, about the density of the inscription, the crowding. "It's been documenting for a long time." "A long time," she agreed. "What has it found?" The ambulance was audible in the distance, the siren's attenuated wail through concrete and summer air. Lena looked at her hands. "Us," she said. "For a very long time it has been documenting us, the city, the infrastructure, the things we build and why we build them, and what we are underneath the building." She turned her hands over, looking at the palms. "It's curious. That's the closest word. It's been down there for, I don't have a number, a very long time, and it watches what happens above it, and it documents what it observes, and it's curious about what we are. The people it took, the ones who went underground and didn't come back, Lena." "It didn't take me," she said. "Then what?" "I stayed." She looked at him. "I chose to stay. I know what it sounds like from up here, but down there in the warm water, with the light and the marks and its attention, it's not how you think it is. It's not what you think it is." She paused. "It's not dangerous. It's not predatory. It's just very old and very curious, and it wants to understand, and the things it uses to understand, the warmth, the water, the marks, they're the same things we use. Documentation, record-keeping, the accumulation of observed evidence over time." The ambulance light was visible now, reflected off the parking structure's wall. "And the post," Marcus said, "on the forum, the upper level is accessible now." "That was me," Lena said. He looked at her. "I wrote it," she said. "I had access to the forum. I had been down there for 8 months, and I had understood some things that I wanted someone else to know, and I wrote the post because I knew you'd come back." She met his eyes. "Because you're the one who would come back." The hospital kept Lena for 4 days. The medical evaluation found her physically unremarkable, the word the attending physician used, which Marcus would think about later. Unremarkable in the sense that her vital signs were within normal range. Her blood work was within normal range.
Her neurological assessment showed no deficit, and her account of 8 months in an underground chamber was physically inconsistent with her physical condition, which showed no signs of 8 months without sunlight, no signs of extended dehydration or malnutrition, no signs of the physical deterioration that a person confined in a dark space for 8 months would accumulate. She was unremarkable. She was also, the psychiatric evaluator noted, somewhat different in her affect than the statements from people who knew her before suggested she had been. Calm in a way that the evaluator found notable, not the flat affect of dissociation, not the performed calm of someone managing distress, but the genuine calm of someone who had spent a long time in a place where there was nothing to be anxious about. The evaluator's report used the phrase adapted to a different environment, and then in the next paragraph crossed it out and replaced it with experienced significant psychological change, which was accurate without being useful. Marcus visited her twice. They talked both times, but not about what either of them needed to talk about, because the hospital room was a place designed for a specific category of human experience, and the conversation they needed to have did not fit that category. On the 4th day, she was released to a sister in Kentucky who had not heard from her in 8 months and who cried at the hospital entrance for 4 minutes and then became very organized and put Lena in a car and drove south. Marcus went back to the parking structure. He went down alone. He went down with his cord and his headlamp and his camera and the knowledge that he was making the same mistake he had made twice before, and he made it anyway, for the same reason he had always made it, because the system had a logic, and the logic had not resolved, and leaving without resolution was something he found that he was not able to do. The corridor was dry. He stood in the bricked opening and shone his light into it, and the corridor was dry. The standing water was gone. The luminescence was dimmer, not gone, but dimmer, the faint glow of the walls more like a residue than an active emission, the way a phosphorescent thing glowed after the activating light was removed. The marks were still there, all of them, the 5 bands, the 6, the density of inscription that covered the walls to the ceiling, still there, dry, clear, precise. The water had withdrawn. Marcus went down the slope to the chamber floor and stood in the dry space and looked at the marks, and understood for the first time something about their arrangement that he hadn't understood on the first or second visit. They were not random even to his untrained eye. They had an organization, not the simple left-to-right horizontal organization of bands, which is what he'd first seen, but a larger organization, a structure above the structure, a pattern in the density and spacing of individual marks that repeated at intervals he could perceive but not yet measure. It had a rhythm, the inscription. It breathed. He photographed everything. He photographed for 2 hours, systematic and complete, every surface, every mark, the high ceiling bands and the floor-level bands and the deep system passage at the far end, which was also dry, the passage descending into a dark that his light could not reach the end of. He sat on the dry chamber floor when he was done and turned his headlamp off. In the dark, the walls glowed, not brightly, faintly, the way stars looked through thin cloud, present but filtered, visible but not clear. The marks glowed. They had absorbed something from the water or from the thing that had made them, and now they emitted it in the dark, a pale distributed light that filled the chamber with just enough illumination to suggest the shape of the space without revealing its details. He sat in the faint light of the marks for a long time.
He thought about what Lena had said. It documents what it finds here, the things we build and why we build them and what we are underneath the building. He thought about the marks on every surface, about the 8 months Lena had been down here, about what 8 months of close observation would add to a record that had been accumulating for much, much longer. He thought about the water rising, about the upper level becoming accessible, about the forum post, about the cord reel wound and waiting. He thought about what it meant to be curious. He turned his headlamp back on. He stood up. He walked to the deep system passage and stood at its edge and looked into the dark that his light couldn't reach the bottom of. "I know you're still there," he said. His voice went into the passage and did not come back. "I know you didn't leave. You withdrew the water. You closed the access, but you're still there." Silence. "The post," he said. "Lena said she wrote it, maybe, but she was down here for 8 months, and she was close to you, and I don't know where she ends and you begin anymore." He paused. "I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. I don't know if you use language, but I know you document. I know you observe. I know you've been watching what we build above you for a very long time." He looked into the dark of the passage. "I'm going to document this, what I've seen, what I've found. I'm going to put it somewhere it can be read, not the police. They won't know what they're reading, not the forum. Someone who knows what they're looking at." The dark was dark. The passage descended into something his instruments could not reach. "I'm going to come back," he said. "I want to understand the marks. I want to understand what you've been documenting. I want to—" He stopped. "I want to know why the water's rising. I want to know what happens when it reaches the surface. I want to know if that's something we can live with or something we can't." He waited. He was not sure what he was waiting for. Then from somewhere below, from the deep passage, from the dark, from the place where the warm water came from and retreated to, the pulse, clear, present, not in his chest this time, in the stone beneath his feet, transmitted up through the limestone and into his body through the soles of his boots, the old irregular rhythm that had no name in any system he knew, but which he had been hearing in various forms since November, and which he was beginning, tentatively, against his better judgment, to read. It pulsed 3 times, then stopped. Marcus stood very still. Then he turned around and walked back up the slope, and through the door frame, and down the corridor, and through the bricked opening, and up the shaft, and out of the access plate, and into the parking structure where the fluorescent lights hummed, and the ordinary July night of Cincinnati waited beyond the exit. And he sat in the parking structure's concrete stairwell and opened his notebook and began to write. He wrote everything. 8 months of everything. The first visit, the second, the shape in the water, Lena's cord reel, the forum post, the descent today, the dry chamber, the marks, the pulse. He wrote it the way he wrote everything that mattered, from the inside, finding the logic the system had for itself, tracing the circuit he hadn't designed, working with the integrity of something built by someone else. It took him 3 hours. At the end he wrote, "It didn't take Lena. She stayed. She chose to be observed, and she was observed, and she came back changed in ways that the doctors found unremarkable. Unremarkable. I keep coming back to that word, as if the most remarkable thing about what happened to her was that her body couldn't be distinguished from an ordinary body, as if whatever was done to her, whatever she absorbed in 8 months of warm water and patient attention, left no physical trace. The marks on the walls, 3 bands when we first found them, 6 by the second visit, every surface covered by the third. It's been documenting for a very long time, and recently it's been documenting faster, more densely, the way a person writes faster when they're trying to capture something before it passes. What is it trying to capture? The water rising, 8 inches every 6 weeks, the upper level accessible, the post on the forum. It's trying to reach the surface, not in the way I was afraid of in November, not the flooding of the upper system, not the warm water in the streets. That's not what reaching the surface means to something that has been underground for as long as it has. It wants to be documented in return. He stopped writing. He looked at the notebook. Then, at the bottom of the page, below everything, he wrote one more line. I think it's been waiting for someone to write back. He closed the notebook. Outside, Cincinnati went about its summer night, the Pendleton district with its outdoor seating and its construction and its new restaurants, the streets above the storm system, above the cut stone corridor, above the dry chamber below which something old and patient and curious turned in the dark and continued what it had always been doing, watching, recording, waiting for the response that had not yet come. Marcus Webb walked out of the parking structure into the warm July air, and he looked up at the sky, which was orange with the city's light, and he thought about what it meant to reach back towards something that had been reaching toward you for longer than your city had existed, longer than your country had existed, longer than your species had been doing the things that constituted existing. He thought about it all the way back to the bus station. He thought about it on the bus back to Columbus. He did not stop thinking about it.
Thank you for listening till the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear more interesting stories.